Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was the only one immune to Wanda's mind control. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The Eren Yuehai's Gamma Gym tasted of ozone and ambition. It was a taste Izuku Midoriya had come to associate with progress. It was the sharp, electric tang of Bakugo's explosions, the subtle hum of Ida's engines, the crackle of Kaminari's uncontrolled discharges, and the faint, almost imperceptible static of his own power, one for all, thrumming just beneath his skin. Today, the gym, a colossal cavern of concrete and steel affectionately nicknamed the training dining land by a younger, more innocent Class 1A, was a symphony of controlled chaos. The exercise was a complex one, designed by Aizawa to test not just raw power, but teamwork, strategy, and restraint. A three-story structure of simulated urban decay stood in the center of the gym, complete with crumbling facades, precarious ledges, and strategically placed civilians, advanced rescue dummies that could cry for help and register damage. The objective: rescue all 10 dummies and apprehend the villain, played with methodical precision by ectoplasm's clones, in under 10 minutes without causing more than 10% collateral damage. Deku's team, consisting of himself, Achiko Uraraka, and Tenya Ida, was a well-oiled machine of speed, power, and utility. "Ida, 3rd floor, northeast corner!" Deku yelled over the din of a nearby explosion from Team Bakugo's sector. His eyes, green and intensely focused, scanned the building's blueprint on a holographic display strapped to his wrist. "The dummy is trapped under a collapsed beam. Your recipro burst can get you there in seconds, but you'll need Uraraka's help for the lift. Understood, Midoriya?" Ida's voice was a crisp baritone, cutting through the noise with practiced authority. His armor gleamed under the industrial lights as he crouched, the engines in his calves whining as they spooled up. "Uraraka, on my position! On it!" Uraraka, already light on her feet, gave Deku a confident thumbs up. She bounded over a pile of rubble, her movements economical and sure. She had come so far from the girl who could only float herself to the point of nausea. Now, her control was a delicate, powerful art. Deku watched them go, a flicker of pride warming his chest before he forced it down. No time for sentiment. He was the team's strategist, the central node of their operation. His role was to see the whole board. He spun around, his boots skidding on the dusty floor, as danger sense flared, not a of true peril, but a low, persistent thrum that told him where the ectoplasm clones were positioned. It was like having a spider sense for trouble, a gift from the 4th user that had saved his skin more times than he could count. "Ectoplasm clone on the 2nd floor, west side," he murmured into his comms, his voice a low, analytical hum. "He's guarding the central stairwell. I'll draw him out. Be ready to move on the main civilian cluster once he's engaged." From the other side of the gym, a familiar roar echoed. "Get the hell out of my way, I see why hot. I'll get all the dummies myself." "Your approach lacks subtlety, Bakugo," came Shoto Todoroki's cool, even reply, followed by the hiss of rapidly forming ice. "We are a team. The objective is efficiency, not just destruction." "Shut up!" Deku allowed himself a small, weary smile. Some things never changed. He took a deep breath, feeling the familiar, comforting surge of one for all. It no longer threatened to shatter his bones with every use. Now, it was a river of power flowing through him, channeled and directed. He coated his legs in the verdant lightning of full cowling at 20%, a manageable output for sustained movement. He could push to 45% in bursts, but Aizawa's lesson was about control, not brute force. He shot forward, a green blur against the gray concrete. He used FA gene, the quirk of the 2nd user, storing kinetic energy in his muscles with each preparatory step. He hit the wall of the training structure, ran 3 paces straight up, and then released the stored energy in a silent, explosive leap that propelled him through a 2nd-story window. He landed in a crouch, dust and glass skittering away from him. The ectoplasm clone stood at the end of the hallway, a perfect, pale duplicate of their teacher, its posture rigid and ready. "Predictable entry, Midoriya," the clone said, its voice a flat monotone. "Sometimes the direct approach is just a feint," Deku replied, a genuine grin touching his lips. he didn't charge. Instead, he shot his left arm forward. Black whip! Tendrils of crackling black energy erupted from his arm, more solid and controllable than ever before. They weren't the wild, untamed whips of his first manifestation. Now they moved with intent, weaving through the air like sentient serpents. They didn't aim for the clone. They wrapped around support pillars, loose pipes, and chunks of debris on the floor. He pulled. The entire hallway seemed to groan in protest. Pipes squealed as they were ripped from the walls. Debris skittered across the floor, creating a chaotic, shifting obstacle course. The ectoplasm clone was forced to leap back, its calm demeanor momentarily disrupted as it dodged a flying piece of rebar. It was the opening he needed. While the clone was distracted, Deku propelled himself forward again, not toward the clone, but past it, a feint within a feint. He was a whisper of motion down the now unguarded stairwell. "Stairwell is clear!" he barked into his comms. "Go, go, go!" He could hear Ida's engines roaring in the distance and Uraraka's encouraging shout. He had done his part. He slid to a halt at the bottom of the stairs, breathing a little heavily, the familiar ache of power singing in his veins. Observing from a raised platform, Toshinori Yagi watched the scene unfold, a frail hand resting on the metal railing. He wasn't in his muscle form. There was no need for all might here. Here, he was just a teacher, a mentor, and the overwhelming pride he felt was almost enough to make his hollow chest ache. Look at him, Toshinori thought, his gaze fixed on the small, green figure. He's not just swinging the power around anymore. He's thinking with it. Black Whip as a distraction, FA gene for mobility. He's using the quirks of his predecessors as tools in a toolbox, not just hammers. He's becoming a true successor. Aizawa, standing beside him with his arms crossed and his expression as neutral as ever, grunted. His analytical skills are finally catching up to his recklessness. Teen Ida Uraraka Midoriya will finish in record time. They always were a good combination of heart, mind, and strength, Toshinori said, his voice soft. He allowed a rare, genuine smile to grace his skeletal features. It felt good. The world was at peace. The next generation of heroes was brighter than he could have ever hoped, and his boy was shining. It was a perfect day, and then the sky broke. It didn't start with a sound. It started with a feeling. A subtle drop in atmospheric pressure, the kind that precedes a massive storm. The hairs on Toshinori's arms stood on end. Aizawa's head snapped up, his perpetually tired eyes suddenly wide and alert. High above the reinforced roof of the Gamma Gym, a fracture appeared in the blue canvas of the sky. It wasn't a crack in glass. It was a tear in the very fabric of reality. It looked like a deep purple bruise, shimmering with an energy that felt ancient and wrong. The light of the sun seemed to bend around it, distorted and sickly. A sound followed, but it wasn't a sound one heard with their ears. It was a low, vibrational hum that resonated deep in the bone, in the teeth. It was the sound of a cello string being drawn by a bow made of space-time, a mournful, terrifying note that spoke of cosmic loneliness. Down below, the training exercise ground to a halt. Every student, every clone, every teacher, froze and stared upwards. Bakugo, who had been about to unleash a massive AP shot, lowered his gauntlet, his usual scowl replaced by bewildered shock. "What the hell is that?" he snarled, but his voice lacked its usual explosive force. It was laced with a thread of genuine uncertainty. From the rift, a figure fell. It wasn't a powerful descent or a villainous arrival. It was a limp, helpless tumble, like a doll dropped from a great height. The figure was female, dressed in tattered red and black, her auburn hair fanning out around her as she plummeted. As she grew closer, her face became visible on the gym's massive monitors, which had automatically zoomed in. She was young, her face etched with lines of a grief so profound it seemed to have physically scarred her. Her eyes were closed, but even in their repose, they seemed to hold an ocean of loss. This was Wanda Maximoff, but to the onlookers, she was just a falling, broken mystery. She was headed straight for the center of Muzurifu. And then, just as she was about to become a tragic impact on the pavement miles away, she stopped. Her fall arrested mid-air, 100 feet above the ground. Her eyes snapped open. They glowed with the light of a dying star. A furious, beautiful, terrible scarlet. A wave of pure energy erupted from her, not of destruction, but of something far more insidious. It was the color of her grief, the color of her power, a silent, crimson tide of chaos magic that expanded outwards at impossible speed. It wasn't like an explosion. It didn't push or burn. It washed. It swept over the city, over the country, over the entire planet in the space of a single, drawn-out heartbeat. From his vantage point, Toshinori saw it coming. The red wave was a shimmering, translucent wall of energy. He braced himself, expecting an impact, pain, anything. Instead, it felt like sinking into a warm bath. The wave passed through the Gamma Gym's reinforced walls as if they were mist. Deku, standing at the base of the stairwell, had been knocked off his feet by a stray piece of rubble from his own Black Whip maneuver just a moment before. He was on his back, the wind knocked out of him, as the scarlet light washed over the room. He felt it press against his mind. It was an immense, overwhelming pressure, a psychic force that demanded entry, that promised to smooth over all the rough edges of his soul. It felt like a mother's lullaby and a conqueror's decree all at once. It whispered of an end to struggle, an end to pain, an end to the crushing weight of his heroic destiny. Let go, it seemed to say, be at peace. For a terrifying split second, he felt his own will begin to dissolve, to welcome the sweet, numbing oblivion. Then, the voices came. Get back! The thought wasn't his own. It was a guttural, furious snarl that echoed in the deepest recesses of his consciousness. It was the voice of the second user, sharp and commanding. This power is an intrusion. It seeks to dominate, to erase. It will not have him. This was the third user, his voice a low, dangerous growl. A cacophony erupted in his mindscape, the private sanctuary where the vestiges of One for All resided. It was a chaotic, beautiful storm of defiance. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, raised a hand of pure light, creating a shimmering barrier. Nana Shimura stood before it, her own will a fortress of compassion and strength. The other vestiges, Haikid Shinomori, Daigoro Banjo, and En, added their own power to the defense, their collective willpower, honed over a century of struggle and sacrifice, forming an impenetrable shield. It was 8 generations of heroes standing shoulder to shoulder in his soul, roaring a unified, silent no. The scarlet pressure slammed against their combined will and shattered, repelled by a force it could not comprehend. To Wanda Maximoff, somewhere in the sky, it must have felt like pushing against a door only to find a mountain on the other side. The pressure receded. The whispers faded. Deku gasped, his lungs burning as he drew a ragged breath. The entire mental ordeal had lasted less than a second. He sat up, his body trembling, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. What was that? He whispered to the empty air. A psychic attack of immense scale, Yoichi's voice answered, calm and steady in his mind. It has blanketed the globe. We were able to shield you, Izuku. The combined consciousness of One for All created a firewall she could not breach. She? Deku thought, pushing himself to his feet. He looked around the gym, and the true horror of the situation began to dawn on him. It was silent, not quiet. Silent. The hum of the industrial lights was gone. The distant traffic outside the gym was gone. The very ambient noise of existence seemed to have been scrubbed from the world. The only sound was the frantic thumping of his own heart, and the ragged rasp of his own breathing. And then he saw them. Everyone was standing exactly where they had been when the wave hit. But they were different. Terribly different. Bakugo stood with his gauntlet still raised, but his posture was no longer aggressive. It was still. His face, usually a mask of furious intensity, was completely placid. A serene, gentle smile graced his lips, an expression so alien on his features that it looked like a grotesque parody. The fierce, competitive fire in his crimson eyes was gone, replaced by a soft, faint red glow. Deku took a hesitant step forward. Kaken? Bakugo slowly lowered his arm, the movement unnervingly graceful. He turned his head to look at Deku, and his smile didn't waver. It was empty. Vacant. Deku's blood ran cold. He turned his gaze to Uraraka and Ida, who were standing near the collapsed beam on the 3rd floor. Uraraka had her hand on the slab of concrete, but she wasn't straining. Her quirk was active, the slab floated weightlessly, but she wasn't guiding it. She was just holding it. Her usually bright, bubbly face was a canvas of calm. Her cheeks, normally pink with exertion or laughter, were pale. She, too, had that same placid smile, that same faint scarlet haze in her eyes. Ida stood beside her, his posture ramrod straight, but the militant urgency was gone. He looked like a statue, a perfect monument to a hero, but utterly devoid of the passionate, rule-abiding spirit that defined him. Uraraka? Ida? Deku called out, his voice cracking. It sounded impossibly loud in the dead silence. They both turned their heads in perfect, eerie unison to look down at him. Their smiles widened slightly. It wasn't a happy expression. It was the smile of someone dreaming, someone so lost in a pleasant fantasy that the outside world was a distant inconvenience. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up Deku's throat. He scrambled towards the nearest person. It was Kirishima, who had been in the middle of hardening his arm. His skin was still jagged and rock-like, but his expression was one of blissful tranquility. Kirishima! What's going on? Snap out of it! Deku grabbed his friend's shoulder and shook him. Kirishima's head lolled slightly with the motion, but his smile remained. He raised a hand, not to fight, not to push, but to gently pat Deku's arm. His touch was soft, his rock-like skin feeling unnervingly smooth. There is no need for alarm, Midoriya, Kirishima said. His voice was his own, yet it was not. It lacked all its usual boisterous energy. It was a monotone, a soft, melodic hum. The struggle is over. We have found harmony. Deku recoiled as if burned, snatching his hand back. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with dawning terror, scanning the entire gym. Everyone was the same. Todoroki stood amidst a half-formed glacier, his face, usually a study in stoicism, now held that same serene smile. Momo Yayorozu had a half-created shield emerging from her arm. Her brow, normally furrowed in concentration, was smooth and peaceful. His gaze shot up to the observation deck. To All Might, Toshinori Yagi stood by the railing, his frail body perfectly still. He was looking down at Deku, and he too was smiling. It wasn't the brilliant, confident, camera-ready smile of All Might. It wasn't the gentle, proud smile of his mentor, Toshinori. It was this new smile. This empty, placid, terrifyingly peaceful smile. The faint red glow was there, swimming in the deep shadows of his eye sockets. All Might? Deku's voice was a choked whisper. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Not him. Please, not him. This was his anchor. His symbol. The man who told him he could be a hero. If he was gone, then what hope was there? Is this some kind of quirk? Deku shouted, his voice echoing in the vast, silent space. A villain attack? Everyone, you have to fight it! Wake up! His desperate plea hung in the air, unanswered by any alarm or call to action. Instead, a soft, collective sound rose from the assembled students. It was a gentle sigh, a sound of contented release. Then they began to speak. Their voices, once so distinct and full of personality, Bakugo's snarl, Uraraka's warmth, Ida's formality, now blended together. They weren't perfectly synchronized, but they overlapped in a horrifying, choral drone, a choir of the blissfully lost. Everything is perfect now, Midoriya. The words came from Bakugo, from Kirishima, from Uraraka, from everyone. They turned their placid faces toward him, a sea of serene smiles and glowing red eyes. There is no more pain, said Todoroki, his voice as smooth as his ice. No more fear, added Momo, her voice a soft whisper. No more struggle, Ida stated, his tone one of absolute, calm finality. All Might raised a hand, a gesture not of power, but of gentle beckoning. His voice, thin and frail, joined the chorus, and it was the sound that finally broke something deep inside Izuku. Be at peace, my boy. Deku's breath hitched. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over him. His legs felt weak, and he took a stumbling step back, then another. They weren't attacking him. They weren't threatening him. They were inviting him. They were offering him a place in their silent, smiling paradise. And it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. He was surrounded by everyone he cared about in the world. His friends. His rivals. His mentor. And he had never, ever felt so utterly and completely alone. The silence of the world pressed in on him, a heavy blanket smothering all hope. The only thing he could hear was the frantic, panic drumming of his own heart, a solitary drumbeat in a world that had fallen quiet. The struggle wasn't over. For him, it had just begun. The silence was a physical weight. It pressed in on Izuku Midoriya from all sides, heavier than any physical burden he had ever carried. It filled the cavernous space of the Gamma Gym, absorbing the echo of his own frantic heartbeat, and casting it back at him, amplified and terrifying. He was the only source of noise in a world that had forgotten how to make any. His mind, a frantic engine of analysis and panic, was screaming. This is a quirk. It has to be. A mass hypnosis quirk. A simulation. Aizawa is testing our mental fortitude. Yes, that's it. It's a test. Any second now, he'll blink, his eyes will glow red, and he'll cancel it. He looked up at the observation deck, praying to see that familiar flash of red from his teacher's eyes, the sign of erasure. But Aizawa stood as still as the others, his capture weapon hanging limp, his face a mask of uncharacteristic serenity. The only red glow was the faint, alien haze in his pupils, the same haze that swam in the eyes of All Might beside him. This was not a test. Denial shattered, and raw, undiluted panic flooded the void. Deku's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. He took a stumbling step back, his gaze darting from one placid face to another. Uraraka. Ida, Todoroki. Ajiri. Yaoyorozu. Kirishima. Kaminari. Jiraiya. Each one a friend, a comrade, a piece of his life, and each one now a porcelain doll, smiling a perfect, empty smile. No, he whispered, the word barely a puff of air. No, no, no. He fixed his gaze on the one person he knew, without a shadow of a doubt, could be provoked. The one person whose entire being was a protest against silence and stillness. Kaken, Deku said, his voice trembling but gaining a desperate edge of volume. Stop this. This isn't funny. Whatever this is, you have to fight it. You're stronger than this. Bakugo's head tilted, a slow, inquisitive gesture that was chillingly devoid of his usual explosive energy. The serene smile on his face didn't flicker. There is nothing to fight, Izuku, he said. His voice was stripped of its usual gravelly bark. It was smooth, calm, and horrifically gentle. The use of his first name, spoken with such tranquility, was more jarring than any curse word could have ever been. There is only peace. You should accept it. It's so much easier. Easier? Deku choked out, a hysterical laugh bubbling in his chest. You've never chosen easy in your entire life. You fight everything. You fight me, you fight All Might, you fight the vending machine when it eats your change. Fight this. He took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists, trying to project an anger he didn't feel, anything to get a real reaction. Come on, Kaken! Are you just going to stand there? What happened to being the #1 hero? You can't be #1 if you're just some puppet. For a single, hopeful instant, he thought he saw a flicker. A twitch in Bakugo's eyebrow. A faint tightening of his jaw. But it was gone as quickly as it came, smoothed over by the overwhelming placidity. The choral drone began again, a wave of soft voices washing over him. He is at peace, Midoriya. It was Kirishima, his tone one of gentle chiding. We all are, said Uraraka from the 3rd floor, her voice floating down like a feather. You are the only one who is agitated, Ida stated, a simple, logical observation. You are the only one in pain, and then they began to move. It wasn't an attack. It was a convergence. A slow, synchronized, graceful movement. Bakugo took a step toward him, his hand raised. The metal of his gauntlet gleamed, but he wasn't pulling the pin. His palm was open, inviting. From the side, Kirishima began to walk toward him, his smile beatific. Shoto, from across the gym, started to glide forward, a thin sheet of ice smoothing the path before him, not as a weapon, but as a carpet being rolled out. They were closing in, a circle of serene faces and glowing red eyes. Their intent wasn't to harm. Deku's danger sense, which should have been screaming, was eerily quiet. There was no malice here, no killing intent. There was only a unified, overwhelming purpose, to calm him. to make him join them. It's alright. Uraraka's voice cooed, as she began to float gently down from the third floor, her movements like a dancer's. We'll help you find peace. The sheer wrongness of it all was suffocating. This gentle, loving, inexorable advance was 1,000 times more terrifying than any villain's charge. He was a discordant note in a symphony of silence, and the orchestra was moving to tune him. He stumbled back, his heel catching on a piece of rubble. He fell, landing hard on his backside, scrambling away like a cornered animal. The circle tightened. No. No, I won't let you. I can't, his mind screamed, but his body was frozen in terror. He squeezed his eyes shut, a desperate, childish instinct to make the horror go away. He was trapped. Alone, and in the darkness behind his eyelids, in the screaming silence of his own panic, he felt a flicker of warmth. A familiar presence. Izuku. The voice was not in his ears, but in the core of his being. It was Nana Shimura, her tone a lifeline in a sea of despair. Breathe, child. You are not alone. We are here. He retreated from the world, diving headlong into his own soul, into the swirling, stardusted void of the mindscape. He was a frantic, terrified mote of consciousness, and before him stood the 8 ghostly figures of his predecessors, a silent council of heroes. They were solid, more real than the placid puppets in the world outside. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first user, stood at the forefront, his expression somber but steady. His ethereal form glowed with a soft, white light. What you felt, Izuku, he began, his voice echoing with an ancient patience, was a wave of psychic energy. A form of global telepathic suggestion or control. It is incredibly powerful, born of a will so immense it could rewrite the emotional state of billions. But why didn't it get me? Deku's thoughts were a frantic jumble. I felt it. It was pushing. It did get you. The second user, a man whose stern, scarred face had only recently become familiar, cut in. His tone was blunt, practical. It washed over you like everyone else. But it found us. One for all is more than just a stockpile of power. The third user elaborated, his long coat swirling around him like smoke. It is a confluence of wills, a collective consciousness forged in battle, sacrifice, and an unbreakable desire to save. 8 generations of resolve, of hope, of defiance. We became a wall in your mind. A psychic firewall. She pushed, and we pushed back. Deku looked at them, these ghosts who were his greatest secret and his truest allies. The scale of what they had done, of what they represented, finally began to sink in. They hadn't just given him their quirks, they had given him their very spirit. Nana Shimura drifted closer, her spectral form radiating a comforting warmth. She placed a hand on his shoulder, and though it was intangible, he felt the reassurance to his core. I know how you feel, Izuku. To see those you care for twisted into something they are not, it is a unique kind of pain. But you cannot let that pain paralyze you. They are still in there. You must believe that. Her voice was soft, but laced with the steel of a hero who had made the ultimate sacrifice. She's right. The second user barked, snapping Deku's attention back to the immediate crisis. Despair is a luxury we don't have. They are attempting to subdue you. Your panic is a signal, a flaw in their perfect world that they are trying to correct. You need to get out. Now. Escape? Deku thought, the image of the tightening circle flashing in his mind. But I can't fight them. I can't hurt them. You won't have to, said Daigoro Banjo, the boisterous fifth user, a wide grin on his face. He flexed his own ghostly arms, from which spectral black whips coiled and writhed. Black whip ain't just for hittin', kid. It's for movin'. For grabbin'. For making a mess. Be unpredictable. Be chaotic. Their movements are synchronized, placid. Break their rhythm. Haikid Shinomori, the slender fourth user, stepped forward. Use my gift. Danger sense is silent because they bear you no ill will. But it can still perceive intent. You will feel them before they touch you. Use that warning to evade. Do not let them touch you. And the sixth user, a figure shrouded in a heavy coat, simply nodded. Smoke screen will cover your retreat. The plan formed in his mind, a blueprint assembled from the wisdom of his predecessors. It wasn't a plan for victory. It was a plan for survival. He felt a sliver of resolve cut through the ice of his fear. He was their vessel. He was the ninth user. He would not fail them. He would not fail his friends. He opened his eyes. The world snapped back into sharp, terrifying focus. Bakugo's outstretched hand was now only a few feet away. Kirishima was closing in from his left, his gentle smile a nightmarish fixture. Okay, Deku thought, his heart still hammering but now with purpose. Okay. I can do this. He took one last, steadying breath. Then he exploded into motion. Black Whip! Instead of a single whip, he unleashed a dozen. They shot out in all directions, not at his classmates, but at the environment around them. Tendrils of black energy wrapped around the support beams of the observation deck high above. Others latched onto the steel frame of the training structure. Several more shot low, weaving a complex spiderweb across the floor between the advancing students. He pulled, not with the intent to harm, but with the intent to move. He used his friend's own weight and momentum against them. The low-slung whips went taut, and Kirishima and Siro, their movements lacking their usual combat-honed agility, stumbled over them. They didn't fall with a crash, but with a slow, graceful tumble, their serene smiles never leaving their faces even as they hit the floor. At the same time, Deku used the upper whips as anchors. He pulled himself into the air, a green blur of motion, swinging in a wide, powerful arc over Bakugo's head. What the? Bakugo's placid expression finally broke for a fraction of a second, a flicker of his old, instinctual combat awareness trying to surface as Deku sailed over him. But the scarlet peace washed over it again, and his face went slackly serene. He simply turned, his movements fluid, and began to follow Deku's trajectory. Deku landed lightly on the second story of the training structure, his boots barely making a sound. Below, the entire class was now reorienting toward his new position, their heads turning in uncanny unison. They began to move towards the structure, their purpose singular. He had to get out of the gym. Out of the school. He turned and ran, full cowling thrumming around his legs. He burst through the flimsy interior walls of the training building, not even slowing down. He emerged on the other side, seeing the massive bay doors of the gym 100 yards away. They were his only exit. Standing directly in his path, however, was Shoto Todoroki. Shoto's expression was as calm as the rest, but his power was already in motion. A massive wall of ice, intricate and beautiful like a giant snowflake, was rising from the floor, threatening to seal off the exit. "Stay, Midoriya," Shoto said, his voice a melodic whisper on the silent air. "This is for your own good. The world is better now." Deku didn't have time to argue. He didn't have time to think. He just acted, channeling the second user's pragmatism. He activated Smokescreen. A thick, gray cloud erupted from his body, billowing outwards in an instant. It was disorienting, even to him, but he had the vestiges in his mind, a compass in the chaos. "Left Izuku! He's creating an ice path to his right!" Nana's voice was urgent in his head. Deku veered left, plunging deeper into his own smoke. He could hear the hiss of ice forming nearby, but he was already past it. He burst out of the smoke cloud near the bay doors, only to find Ida waiting for him, his stance perfect, ready to intercept. "Your agitation is illogical," Ida stated, his engines beginning to whine, the sound eerily muted in the oppressive quiet. "Allow us to restore your equilibrium." He shot forward, a blue and silver streak aiming not for a tackle, but for a perfect, restraining hold. F.A. Jean, Deku thought, planting his feet and releasing the kinetic energy he'd been storing during his run. It wasn't an attack. It was a pure, explosive burst of movement. He shot backwards, away from Ida, the sudden change in direction leaving his friend to grasp at empty air. He used the momentum to flip onto his hands, then kicked off the floor, propelling himself up towards the high ceiling. He fired another strand of Black Whip. It slapped against the massive control panel for the bay doors, high on the wall. He funneled a tiny, precise amount of one for all through the whip, a trick he'd been practicing for weeks. The panel sparked, shorting out. With a deep, groaning screech that sounded like a scream in the silence, the massive steel doors began to slide open. Sunlight, brilliant and unfiltered, streamed into the gym. Deku dropped back to the floor, his body aching, his lungs burning. He spared one last, heartbreaking glance behind him. His friends, his entire class, stood together in the middle of the gym, bathed in the new light, their placid smiles fixed on him, their red-tinged eyes full of a strange, gentle pity. They made no move to follow him out. It was as if, by leaving the controlled environment of the gym, he was no longer their immediate problem to solve. He turned and ran, bursting out into the sunlight and the fresh air. He ran across the vast, manicured lawns of the UA campus, not daring to look back. He expected sirens. He expected alarms. He expected the school's defense systems to activate. There was nothing. Only silence. He vaulted the main gate, landing on the street outside. And the true, soul-crushing scale of the phenomenon hit him with the force of a physical blow. The city was a silent, moving tapestry. Cars glided down the streets in perfect, orderly lines, all maintaining the exact same speed. There were no horns honking, no engines revving, no music blaring from open windows. Pedestrians moved along the sidewalks, their gaits synchronized, their steps falling in a soft, rhythmic pattern. They all wore the same expression he had just fled from, a gentle, placid smile. Their eyes all held that same faint, scarlet glow. A salaryman in a crisp suit walked past, his briefcase held at a perfect angle. A group of teenagers who should have been laughing and shouting stood in a circle, simply smiling at each other. A mother pushed a stroller, the baby inside not crying or cooing, but looking up at the sky with a serene, silent smile of its own. The sheer, overwhelming perfection of it was a nightmare. The city was functioning, but it was no longer alive. The chaos, the noise, the beautiful, messy, unpredictable friction of life had been erased. It was a perfectly choreographed ballet performed by billions of empty puppets. He ducked into an alleyway, pressing his back against the cool brick, trying to control his frantic breathing. The sounds of his own gasps for air felt like gunshots in the stillness. "Stay calm, kid," the second user's voice grounded him. "You're out. That's step one. Now you need to disappear. Disappear. Right." He couldn't stay out in the open. He was a flaw, an anomaly. He didn't know if the controlled people would report him, or if the woman who caused this could sense him, but he couldn't take the chance. He moved through the back alleys and shadowed streets, a ghost in a city of ghosts. He used danger sense to navigate, the quirk acting as a proximity alarm. It wouldn't flare with a spike of peril, but a low, steady hum would intensify whenever one of the placid citizens got too close, allowing him to melt into a doorway or slip behind a dumpster before he was seen. He saw pro-heroes. Empty Lady stood at a major intersection, not in her giant form, but at her normal size, directing the silent, flowing traffic with slow, graceful hand gestures, a serene smile on her face. Kamui Woods was perched on a rooftop, his wooden limbs extended to form a beautiful, intricate archway over the street below, for no apparent reason other than aesthetics. They weren't heroes anymore. They were decorations. Living, breathing, smiling set pieces in this perfect, horrifying world. Hours passed. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The sight, usually a source of comfort for Deku, was now just a backdrop for the silent horror show. He needed a place to hide. A place to think. He found it in a small, slightly run-down apartment complex on the edge of the district. It was the kind of place that was easy to overlook. He used a delicate strand of black whip to jimmy the lock on a ground-floor window and slipped inside. The apartment was dark and quiet, but it was a normal quiet. A quiet born of absence, not of control. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light slanting through the grimy window. A half-eaten bowl of noodles sat on a small table, a testament to a life interrupted. He secured the window, drew the blinds, and sank to the floor in the deepest shadow he could find, his back against the wall. He was safe. For now. And with the safety, the adrenaline that had kept him going finally crashed. The full, crushing weight of his isolation descended upon him. He thought of Uraraka's gentle voice. Ida's logical pronouncements. Bakugo's calm, empty eyes. All Might's smiling, beckoning hand. He buried his face in his knees and the sobs he had been holding back finally broke free. They were silent, racking tremors that shook his entire body. Tears streamed down his face, soaking the fabric of his torn gym uniform. He cried for his friends. He cried for his mentor. He cried for the noisy, chaotic, wonderful world that had been stolen away. He was 17 years old, and he was, in a very real sense, the last person on Earth. In his mindscape, Nana Shimura didn't speak. She simply stood by his consciousness, her presence a silent, comforting vigil. She let him grieve. He cried until he was empty, until his throat was raw and his head throbbed. When the tears finally subsided, he was left with a hollow, aching exhaustion. It was the second user who spoke first, his voice hard but not unkind. Grieve later. Survive now. You did well, ninth. You escaped. But this is just the beginning. Deku lifted his head, wiping his tear-streaked face with the back of a dirty hand. He looked out the tiny crack in the blinds at the silent, twilight city. The streetlights flickered on in perfect, silent unison. He took a shaky breath. The despair was still there, a cold, heavy stone in his gut. But beneath it, something else was beginning to form. A tiny, defiant ember of the hero he was meant to be. He finally understood. This wasn't a typical villain attack. He'd faced villains who wanted destruction, like Shigaraki. He'd faced villains who wanted to remake society, like Stain. But this was different. This wasn't about destruction or ideology. The woman in the sky, the source of all this, hadn't hurt anyone. She hadn't destroyed anything. She thought she had saved them. She had looked upon a world of pain, of struggle, of heroes breaking their bodies and villains lashing out in their own agony, and she had fixed it. She had erased the negative side of the emotional spectrum, leaving only a bland, uniform peace. It was a salvation born of immense grief, a prison crafted from love. His mission wasn't to defeat an enemy. How could he punch a concept like misguided compassion? How could he fight an opponent who truly believed they were doing the right thing? No. His mission was to save them. He had to save everyone from this perfect, silent cage. He had to give them back their right to be sad, to be angry, to struggle, to fail, and to find their own, genuine happiness on the other side. He had to give them back their noise. He looked out at the twilight world, at the placid smiles and the glowing red eyes. He was alone, hunted, and facing a power beyond his comprehension. But the path forward, while terrifying, was clear. Survive. Understand. And then, somehow, save them all. The ember of resolve in his chest burned a little brighter. He was Izuku Midoriya. He was the 9th user of One for All. And he would not let the world end in a quiet smile. Days bled into one another in a silent, seamless stream. Izuku Midoriya learned to measure time not by the clock, but by the slow, inexorable crawl of the sun across the sky and the deepening of shadows in the alleyways that had become his new home. He was a phantom, a whisper of motion in a world rendered static. The city of Muzurifu, once a vibrant symphony of life, was now a museum exhibit, perfectly preserved and utterly dead. His life became a routine dictated by primal needs. By day, he remained hidden, holed up in abandoned apartments, dusty warehouses, or the forgotten maintenance tunnels beneath the city. He would watch the world through grimy windows or from the vantage point of a shadowed rooftop, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He saw families taking silent walks in the park, their children not running or laughing but strolling with a placid grace. He saw shopkeepers standing behind their counters, their faces serene, waiting for customers who would purchase items with smooth, efficient movements, and no exchange of pleasantries. The economy hadn't collapsed, it had simply been pacified. By night, under the sterile glow of the street lights that turned on in perfect unison, he moved. He became a scavenger. His first forays were born of desperate hunger and thirst. He would slip into a 24-hour convenience store, the door chiming softly in the oppressive silence, a sound so startling it made him flinch. Inside, the shelves were perfectly stocked, the fluorescent lights humming in a way that felt normal, yet profoundly wrong. The lone cashier would stand behind the counter, smiling that same gentle, empty smile, their gaze fixed on some distant, peaceful point. Deku moved with a practiced stealth he hadn't known he possessed. He would fill a backpack with protein bars, bottled water, and anything that wouldn't spoil. He never took much from any single place, a strange, ingrained sense of fairness still operating within him even at the end of the world. He would leave crumpled yen notes on the counter, a futile gesture of a life that no longer existed, before slipping back into the darkness. He felt like a thief, but also like an archaeologist, studying the ruins of a civilization that had vanished overnight. The greatest threat in this new world wasn't malice, but order. The pro-heroes, once the city's chaotic and beloved guardians, had been repurposed. They were now the shepherds of the Great Peace. They patrolled the streets, their movements no longer flamboyant or aggressive, but calm and methodical. They didn't look for crime, they looked for dissonance, for anything or anyone that deviated from the silent harmony. Deku learned their patterns. Endeavor, the fiery #1 hero, would patrol the downtown core, his flames dormant, his expression one of beatific calm. He would gently guide a car that had drifted slightly from its lane back into perfect alignment, or adjust a fallen signpost with meticulous care. The sight of the world's most intense man performing such placid, mundane tasks was a constant, visceral shock to Deku's system. His lifeline was danger sense. The quirk of the fourth user was his eyes and ears in this silent landscape. It didn't scream with alarm, for the shepherds meant him no harm. Instead, it was a low, persistent thrum in the back of his skull, a psychic barometer that measured intent. The closer a shepherd got, the more intense the hum became, a clear, unmistakable signal to hide. One evening, crouched behind a large planter on a pedestrian overpass, the hum suddenly spiked. Deku flattened himself, peering through the leaves. Below, a familiar figure was walking down the center of the street. It was Present Mike, his iconic speaker collar still around his neck, his triangular glasses glinting, but his mouth, usually open in a rock and roll yell, was closed in that same serene smile. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't speaking. He was utterly silent. The symbol of sound had been muted. As Deku watched, a stray cat, perhaps one of the few creatures not fully susceptible to the psychic wave, darted out from an alley, skittish and afraid. It let out a panicked meow. The sound, so small and normal, was like a bomb going off in the silence. Present Mike stopped. His head turned, the movement unnervingly smooth, and he fixed his gaze on the cat. He took a step towards it, his hand outstretched, not to hurt it, but to calm it. The cat, sensing the wrongness, hissed and fled. Present Mike watched it go, his smile faltering for a barest fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion in his glowing red eyes before the placid mask settled back into place. He then resumed his silent patrol as if nothing had happened. Deku let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The message was clear. Any disruption, any sound, any sign of agitation, was a target for correction. He was a walking, breathing disruption. He couldn't keep running and hiding forever. Survival wasn't enough. He had to fight back. But how? It's an energy, Izuku Yoichi's voice echoed in the quiet space of his mindscape. The first user's presence was a constant, steadying force. Like a radio broadcast, blanketing the world. All broadcasts have a source. An antenna. Deku focused, pushing past his own fear and loneliness, and tried to feel what the vestiges felt. He had felt the psychic wave wash over him, a pressure his mind had repelled, but residual traces of it lingered in the air, a static he was now uniquely tuned to. He closed his eyes, sinking into his senses. He felt it. A faint, almost imperceptible pressure against his mental firewall. It was everywhere, but it wasn't uniform. It was like standing in a room with a single, powerful heater. You could feel its warmth from anywhere, but the closer you got, the more intense it became. The pressure seemed to be emanating from a specific direction. It was stronger when he faced the city center. The epicenter, Deku thought, a spark of clarity cutting through the fog of despair. It's coming from somewhere in the middle of Muzurifu. I need to find the source. He whispered to the empty night, the words feeling foreign and loud on his tongue. I need to know who or what is doing this. Information is the first weapon in any war, the second user's gruff voice stated in his mind. Wandering blindly will get you caught. You need intelligence. Surveillance. A map of the battlefield. A map. Where could he get a map of a global energy phenomenon? His mind raced, cataloging the city's resources. University labs? Pro-hero agencies? Then it hit him. There was one place in Japan with the technological capacity to monitor global energy signatures, to track anomalies on a planetary scale. A place designed to see everything, the Chiyoda headquarters of the Public Security Intelligence Agency. The PSI. Japan's premier intelligence service. It was a fortress of data and surveillance, located miles away in Tokyo, but he knew they had satellite offices and secure data hubs throughout the country, including one heavily fortified building right here in Mizudafu. It was an insane idea. A civilian, a teenage boy, breaking into one of the most secure government facilities in the country. But what was sanity in a world like this? It's our only move, the third user affirmed, his voice a low rumble of agreement. High risk, high reward. We get in, we access their systems, we find the source, we get out. The decision settled in him, heavy and solid. It was the first real plan he'd had in days. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about taking the first step back. The next 48 hours were a blur of reconnaissance. He moved closer to the city center, the psychic pressure growing from a faint hum to a noticeable thrum against the walls of his mind. The PSI data hub was a sleek, modern monolith of black glass and reinforced concrete, an imposing, windowless structure that screamed "keep out." He spent an entire day watching it from a derelict building across the street. The security was formidable. High-tech cameras swept the perimeter, pressure plates were likely embedded in the manicured lawn, and the guards were not smiling civilians, but elite, armed agents of the state. And, he noted with a sinking feeling, they were all controlled. They moved with a placid, synchronized precision, their eyes holding the same vacant red glow. They were perfect guards, tireless, incorruptible, and utterly devoted to their programmed task. A frontal assault was suicide. A stealthy approach seemed impossible. "Think, kid, think," Daigoro Banjo's boisterous voice urged him. "You're not just a bruiser. You're All Might's successor. You're a thinker. What did the old man always say about you?" Deku remembered All Might's words from years ago, a lifetime ago. "Your greatest strength is that you run in to help, but your true power is that you think, you analyze, you mumble and strategize." He pulled out a crumpled notebook and a pen he'd scavenged, his one comfort, his one piece of the old world. He began to mutter, the old habit returning as he sketched the building, the camera placements, the guards' patrol routes. The cameras have blind spots, but they overlap. The guards patrol in pairs, perfect synchronization, never deviating. The main entrance is a death trap. The roof has microwave emitters and motion sensors, but there, on the north face, he saw it. A maintenance access hatch for the building's climate control systems, 20 feet up a sheer concrete wall. It was small, probably alarmed, and in a slight recess that was a temporary blind spot between two sweeping camera arrays. The window of opportunity was less than 5 seconds. Impossible for a normal person, but he wasn't a normal person. That night, he made his move. The moon was a sliver in the sky, cloaking the city in deep shadow. He crept to the base of the north wall, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He was wearing a dark hoodie he'd found, the closest thing he had to camouflage. "Ready, Izuku?" Nana's voice was a steadying presence. "Ready." He watched the cameras. One swept left, the other right. For a few brief seconds the wall was clear. "Fag," he whispered, storing kinetic energy with a few quick, silent steps on the spot. He burst forward, not making a sound. He ran up the wall, a trick that was becoming second nature. As he neared the hatch, he released the stored energy, launching himself the last few feet. He grabbed the hatch's handle just as the cameras began to sweep back. He flattened himself against the wall, praying he was hidden in the recess. The cameras beamed past inches from his head. He let out a slow, shaky breath. Now for the lock. It was a high-tech electronic keypad. No chance of picking it. But he didn't need to. A single, thin tendril of black whip emerged from his fingertip. It was no thicker than a wire. He carefully threaded it into the seam of the hatch's control panel. He felt for the internal wiring, his senses hyper-aware. He found the magnetic lock circuit. He channeled a minuscule, precise pulse of 1-for-all's energy down the tendril, not enough to fry it, just enough to force the lock to disengage. He heard a soft click. He pulled the heavy hatch open and slipped inside, closing it silently behind him. He was in a dark, narrow ventilation shaft. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and filtered air. He had done it. He was in. The next hour was a tense, nerve-wracking crawl through the building's metallic guts. He navigated by following the faint hum of the central servers, using Blackwhip to pull himself up vertical shafts and smokescreen to mask his movements past grates that opened into occupied hallways. Twice he had to freeze, holding his breath for minutes on end as Placid agents performed system checks just feet from his hiding place. Danger sense was a constant, low-grade headache, a signal of the dozens of controlled minds all around him. Finally, he found it. A grated opening looked down into a massive, chilled server room. It was a cathedral of data, rows upon rows of humming black monoliths, their blinking lights a constellation in the darkness. The room was empty. He dropped silently to the floor below, landing in a crouch. He made his way to the central terminal, a holographic interface glowing in the center of the room. He wasn't a master hacker, but he was a digital native and a quick study. He didn't need to break through firewalls. The internal system was logged in, trusted. The Placid agents weren't expecting an intruder. He bypassed the user interface, accessing the raw data feeds. He began his search, typing in keywords: energy anomaly, global, psychic wave, biosignature, epicenter. The system cross-referenced trillions of data points in seconds. A global map appeared on the hologram before him. It was covered in a faint, shimmering red overlay, the psychic energy he'd been feeling. And just as he suspected, the overlay wasn't uniform. It radiated outwards, like ripples from a stone dropped in a pond, from a single, intensely bright point. His blood ran cold. The epicenter wasn't just in Muzidifa. It was UA high. No! He breathed. He commanded the system to access satellite surveillance of that location. The map zoomed in, resolving from a blurry red dot to a crystal clear, high-resolution image. It was the training grounds, the Gamma Gym. The very place where it had all started. But the gym was gone. The entire area around it had been changed. The concrete and steel had been reshaped, transformed. The ground was now a lush, impossible garden of scarlet-hued plants and crystalline flowers that pulsed with a soft, internal light. The rubble from their training exercise had been woven into elegant, mournful sculptures. At the very center of this otherworldly oasis, where he and his friends had been training, a throne stood. It wasn't made of gold or stone. It was a swirling, living construct of pure scarlet energy, a vortex of chaos magic given form. It was beautiful and terrifying, a seat of impossible power, and on the throne, someone was sitting. The satellite zoomed in further, the image sharpening until he could see her face. It was the woman from the sky. The woman who had fallen. She was dressed in the same tattered red and black, but the fabric seemed to billow around her as if caught in a wind that didn't exist. Her auburn hair floated gently around her head, a halo of sorrow. She wasn't ranting or gloating. She wasn't reveling in her power. She was simply sitting there, her hands resting in her lap, her head tilted slightly downwards. Her expression was one of such profound, bottomless grief that Deku felt a pang of it in his own chest, a sympathetic echo across the miles. He saw the loss of family, the phantom pain of children who were never real, the crushing weight of a power she could neither understand nor control. He saw the face of a person who had tried to erase her own pain and had accidentally erased the world's along with it. This wasn't the face of a conqueror. It wasn't the face of Shigaraki or All for One. This was the face of a lonely, broken person who had been given the power of a god and the heart of a grieving mother. She was the queen of this silent world, sitting on a throne of her own making, ruling over a kingdom of peace, and she looked like the saddest, most isolated person in the universe. In his mindscape, the vestiges reacted. That is her. The second user's voice was a blade of ice. The source of the power. An immense threat. We must devise a strategy to neutralize her. Her output is cosmic in scale, the third user added, his tone grim. A direct confrontation is likely unwinnable. We would need to strike with overwhelming force at a moment of weakness. Their words were tactical. Logical. They saw a target. A problem to be solved. An enemy to be defeated. But Deku didn't see an enemy. He saw a person. He looked at the image of the grieving woman on her crimson throne, and he didn't feel anger. He didn't feel hatred. He felt a devastating, soul-shaking wave of empathy. He knew what it was like to feel alone. He knew what it was like to carry a power that felt like a burden, to feel the weight of the world on your shoulders. His pain was a fraction of hers, a pale shadow, but it was a familiar shape. He had come here looking for a monster. He had found a mirror. He realized, in a moment of stunning, terrifying clarity, that they were wrong. The vestiges were wrong. Punching his way to her wouldn't work. Attacking her would only validate her worldview, that the world was nothing but conflict and pain. It would be like trying to put out a fire with gasoline. He couldn't defeat her. He had to reach her. Her name is Wanda Maximoff, he whispered, reading the data file the system had pulled up. It was sparse, full of multiversal jargon and conflicting reports from other realities, but her name was there. She's not a villain. Boy, do not be naive. The second user snarled in his mind. Look at what she has done. She has enslaved the entire planet. Her grief is irrelevant in the face of her actions. Her grief is the reason for her actions. Deku thought back, his own conviction hardening into a sharp point. Don't you see? She's not doing this because she's evil. She's doing it because she's in so much pain. She can't imagine a world where pain is a necessary part of life. We can't fight her. It'll just prove her right. We have to understand her. A silence fell over the mindscape. The vestiges, for all their power and experience, were warriors. They saw threats and targets, victory and defeat. This idea, of empathy as a primary weapon, of understanding as a strategy, was alien to some of them. It was Deku's quirk. The one he was born with. His reckless, boundless, heroic empathy. He stared at the face of Wanda Maximoff on the screen, a lonely queen on a crimson throne, and his mission, once a vague concept of saving everyone, became terrifyingly specific. He had to walk into the heart of her power, into her garden of sorrow, and face the grieving goddess not as a soldier, but as a kindred spirit. He had to offer a hand, not a fist. He wiped the data, erased his digital footprints, and slipped back into the ventilation shafts, his heart no longer just heavy with despair, but with the terrible weight of a new, impossible purpose. The journey from the PSI data hub back towards the scarred heart of Muzutafu was a pilgrimage through a silent hell. Every placid face Izuku Midoriya passed was a fresh wound, a reminder of the stakes. Knowing the source of the control, seeing the face of the grieving witch on her throne of sorrow, had not lessened the horror, it had sharpened it into a terrifyingly specific point. His destination was Yue, High, a place that had once been a symbol of hope and was now the epicenter of a global trance. He moved with a grim purpose, the scavenger's desperation replaced by a soldier's resolve. The psychic pressure against his mind grew with every block, a constant, thrumming reminder that he was walking into the lion's den. The vestiges in his mind were a silent, tense council. They did not agree with his empathetic approach, particularly the second and third users, but they respected his conviction. They had chosen him as the ninth, and they would stand with him, a silent guard at the gates of his soul. The UA campus was even more unsettling up close than it had been on the day he fled. The school's formidable defensive walls were still active, but they seemed less like a barrier to keep intruders out and more like the perimeter of a sanctuary, protecting the peace within. The main gate was open, an unspoken invitation. As he stepped onto the hallowed grounds, he felt the air change. It was thick with chaos magic, heavy and sweet like overripe fruit. Illusions flickered at the edges of his vision, ghostly temptations tailored to his deepest desires. He saw his mother Inko, smiling proudly, her face free from the worry lines his dangerous life had etched there. He saw a brief, shimmering image of himself standing beside a healthy, vibrant All Might, both of them in their prime, the perfect hero duo. He saw Eri, laughing, her horn completely gone, her childhood unmarred by trauma. It's not real, he told himself, his jaw tight, his steps not faltering. He pushed through the mirages, the lies falling away like mist as he focused on his goal. The once pristine lawns were now part of Wanda's impossible garden. The grass was a deep, velvety crimson, and strange, crystalline flowers pulsed with a soft, internal light. casting an ethereal glow on the path. The very air seemed to hum a sorrowful lullaby. He rounded the corner of the main building, his eyes fixed on the transformed Gamma Gym in the distance. And then he froze, standing at the entrance to the garden, at the very spot where the normal grounds of UA gave way to Wanda's surreal creation, was a guardian. He was a scarecrow of a man, his frame thin and skeletal, lost in a baggy yellow suit that hung from his shoulders. His blonde hair, usually swept up into two proud antennae, was limp and lifeless. His face, gaunt and shadowed, was tilted slightly downwards. He stood perfectly still, a silent sentinel barring the way. It was Toshinori Yagi. All Might. Deku's breath caught in his throat. Of all the shepherds, of all the placid puppets he had seen, this was the one he had dreaded encountering the most. This was not just his mentor, his predecessor, the symbol of peace. This was the man who had given him a life, a dream, a future. He was the foundation upon which Izuku Midoriya, the hero, had been built. Izuku, be careful, Nana Shimura's voice was a soft, urgent warning in his mind. He is not just another shepherd. He is positioned here for a reason. He is her royal guard. Deku took a hesitant step forward. All Might? He called out, his voice barely a whisper. The skeletal figure's head lifted slowly. The movement was fluid, but lacked Toshinori's usual weary grace. His eyes, sunken and shadowed, found Deku's, and they held the same faint, crimson glow as all the others. A serene, gentle smile touched his thin lips, a chilling parody of the brilliant, confident grin that had once saved the world. Ah, young Midoriya, All Might said. The voice was his, that familiar, reedy tone of his true form, but the cadence was wrong. It was smooth, melodic, devoid of the passion and weariness that made it human. It was a recording played through a broken speaker. I was told you would come. She is very interested in the one who resists the gift. Deku's heart felt like a lead weight in his chest. Gift? He choked out. This isn't a gift, All Might. It's a prison. You have to fight it. Please, I know you're in there. The symbol of peace would never accept this. All Might took a step forward, his movements unnervingly deliberate. But that is where you are mistaken. The symbol of peace is precisely why I accept this. Do you remember, my boy? The burden. The pain. The constant smiles to hide the bleeding, the surgeries, the fear of not being strong enough. I carried that weight for so long. He raised a frail hand and gestured to himself, his smile widening slightly. Now it is gone. There is no more burden. No more pain. No more sacrifice. The world is at peace. A true, lasting peace, not one maintained by fists and broken bodies. I am at peace. Finally. The words were a calculated, devastating blow, aimed at the very core of Deku's ideology. They were All Might's truths, twisted into a justification for this horror. Wanda wasn't just controlling him. She was using his own history, his own suffering, as the bars of his cage. That pain made you who you are. Deku argued, his voice rising with desperation. The struggle is what gave your smile meaning. A peace forced on people isn't peace at all, it's just quiet. You taught me that. You taught me that saving people means giving them the choice to be saved. All Might shook his head slowly, a gesture of gentle pity. You are still so young. You cling to your suffering as if it is a badge of honor. But it is just a wound. And she has healed it. For me, for everyone. He took another step forward. She can heal you too, young Midoriya. You just have to let go of all this needless struggle. Lay down your burden. Let me help you. His posture shifted. It was subtle, but Deku saw it instantly. The frail, broken man vanished, replaced by the muscle memory of a fighter. His stance widened, his center of gravity lowered. He was preparing to subdue him. Ninth, he is not open to reason. The second user's voice was a harsh command in his mind. His mind is locked. You cannot talk your way past him. You must fight. Fight, All Might? The thought was sacrilege. It was unthinkable. I can't, Deku whispered, taking a step back. You do not have a choice, All Might said, his serene smile remaining fixed. Do not worry. I will be gentle, And then he moved. He wasn't fast, not in his true form. But he was impossibly precise. His movements were a perfect, economical flow of motion, guided by the hive mind's flawless strategy. He lunged forward, his hand aiming not to strike, but to grip, to hold, to pin Deku down so the scarlet piece could wash over him. Deku reacted on pure instinct. He activated full cowling at 30%, green lightning crackling around him. He dodged to the side, All Might's hand sweeping through the air where his chest had been. The sheer wrongness of it, of dodging an attack from the man who had taught him how to fight, was nauseating. Please stop! Deku yelled, backpedaling furiously. Why do you resist this gift? All Might asked again, his voice calm and even as he advanced. It is everything we ever fought for. A world without villains. A world without pain. He lunged again. This time, Deku was forced to use Black Whip, firing a tendril at a nearby tree to pull himself out of the way, swinging in a wide arc. He landed 20 feet away, his body trembling. This was a battle he could not win in any sense of the word. To win physically would mean hurting his mentor, a violation of everything he stood for. To lose would mean the end of the world. It was an emotional gauntlet, designed to break him. Wanda hadn't just placed a guard here. She had placed his own heart in his path. I won't fight you! Deku screamed, his voice cracking with emotion. You will not have to, All Might replied serenely. Just stop running. He continued his relentless, calm advance. Deku was forced into a desperate, chaotic dance of evasion. He used FA gene to create explosive bursts of speed, propelling himself from one side of the clearing to the other. He used Black Whip as a grappling hook, a safety line, a tool to create distance. He coated his legs in energy for shoot style, but every kick was aimed at the ground, propelling him backwards or into the air, never at the frail man pursuing him. It was a fight without fists. A desperate, one-sided chase where every move was a retreat. He vaulted over a low wall, landing in a patch of crimson grass. All Might followed, his movements slow but inexorable. He was a Terminator in a cheap suit, an angel of peace coming to deliver a terrifying salvation. Think about it, my boy, All Might's voice echoed in the clearing, calm and persuasive. No more broken bones. No more watching your friends get hurt. No more nights spent wondering if you are strong enough. Just quiet. Just peace. The words were poison, tailored to his deepest fears. Deku squeezed his eyes shut for a second, the image of Bakugo impaled during the First War, of Gran Torino's near-death, of Shigaraki's relentless destruction, all flashing through his mind. The offer was so tempting. A world where none of that could ever happen again. Do not listen to him, Izuku. Nana's voice was a firm anchor in the storm of his emotions. That is not his voice. It is hers, wearing his memories like a mask. Remember why you are here. For them. For him. Deku's eyes snapped open, a new fire in their depths. She was right. He couldn't give in. He had to save the man in front of him from the peace he was espousing. He had to save All Might from himself. He stopped running. He stood his ground, breathing heavily, green lightning flickering around him. All Might stopped a few paces away, his head tilted, his serene smile still in place. You're right, Deku said, his voice shaking but clear. You're right about the pain. About the burden. I feel it every day. The fear that I'm not enough, that I'll let everyone down. That I'll fail you. All Might's smile softened, becoming almost paternal. Then you understand. Let it go. No, Deku said, shaking his head. He looked his mentor directly in the eye, trying to see past the crimson haze, to find the real Toshinori Yagi somewhere within. I won't let it go. Because you never did. You were bleeding, you were broken, you were dying. And every single day, you got up and you smiled. Not because you didn't feel the pain, but because you knew that a real smile, a smile earned through tears and struggle, was what gave people hope. Not this empty thing on your face. He took a step forward, channeling his own pain, his own desperation, into his words. You told me I could be a hero. You gave me your power. You gave me everything. You think I'm just going to stand by and watch you become a puppet? Watch you become a part of this silent nightmare? His voice grew louder, more passionate, echoing through the tranquil garden. I will not let you be erased. I will not let your sacrifice, your pain, your entire life be turned into an excuse for this. Your smile saved me, All Might. So now I'm going to save yours. He poured every ounce of his conviction, his love, his desperation into a single, defiant scream. I will save you! The words tore from his throat, a raw, powerful cry of pure heroic intent. It wasn't an attack. It was a promise. A declaration of war against the thing that held his mentor captive. And for a single, miraculous, heart-stopping moment, something happened. All Might's body went rigid. The serene smile on his face flickered, spasming into a grimace of confusion. His outstretched hand, the one that had been ready to subdue Deku, trembled violently. A flicker of the real Toshinori Yagi, the weary, pained, but fiercely defiant man, surfaced from the depths of the psychic control. His blue eyes, for a fraction of a second, lost their red glow. They were wide with a horrifying, dawning awareness. He looked at his own hand, then at Deku, and a single, choked word escaped his lips, his real voice, full of pain and confusion. Run! It was all the opening Deku needed. The hesitation, the crack in the facade, was his only chance. He couldn't win by talking. He couldn't win by fighting. But he could win by escaping. He dropped into a low stance, the green lightning of One for All flaring to life, consuming him. He focused it all into his right arm, not into his fist, but into his fingers. He wasn't aiming for a punch, he was aiming for pure propulsion. Delaware smash! He flicked his fingers, unleashing a colossal cannon of pressurized air. It wasn't aimed at All Might. It was aimed at the ground just beside him. The blast was deafening, a sonic boom that shattered the garden's tranquility. It ripped up the crimson grass, sending dirt and crystalline flowers flying. The shockwave was immense, a physical wall of force. It threw All Might back, not with a direct impact, but with a powerful, overwhelming shove. He tumbled backwards, his frail body unable to withstand the gale-force wind, landing in a heap 10 yards away. He was dazed but unharmed. At the same time, Deku used the equal and opposite reaction of the blast to propel himself in the other direction. He shot forward like a cannonball, a green comet streaking past his fallen mentor. He didn't look back. He couldn't bear to. He just ran, tears streaming from his eyes, blurring the impossible garden into a swirl of red and green. The last thing he heard was the sound of All Might slowly getting to his feet, the brief moment of clarity gone, the placid smile returning to his face. The crack had been sealed. The puppet was back on its strings. But Deku had seen it. He had seen his mentor in there. He wasn't gone. He was just trapped. The encounter had shattered him, but it had also given him something crucial: hope. The control wasn't absolute. It could be fought. It could be broken, even for a moment, by a powerful enough emotional connection. He burst through the last of the illusions and into the central clearing, the area that had once been the Gamma Gym. Wanda's throne of sorrow stood before him, a swirling vortex of scarlet energy. The air was so thick with her power here that it was hard to breathe. He had made it past the Guardian. He had faced his own heart and survived. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the next battle would be infinitely harder. He had faced the Queen's Knight. Now, he had to face the Queen herself. The raw, kinetic energy of the Delaware smash dissipated, leaving Izuku Midoriya stumbling into the epicenter of Wanda Maximoff's power. The air was a physical presence here, thick and humming, saturated with the scarlet residue of chaos magic. His lungs burned with every breath, and the psychic pressure against his mental firewall intensified from a steady thrum to a deafening roar. The vestiges in his mind were a silent, solid wall, but he could feel the strain, feel the sheer, overwhelming power they were holding at bay. Tears still blurred his vision, hot trails marking paths through the grime on his face. The image of All Might's momentary, horrified clarity was burned into his memory, a flickering candle of hope in a gale of despair. He had gotten through. For a second, he had reached his mentor. That tiny victory was the only thing keeping him on his feet, the only thing preventing his legs from buckling under the combined weight of exhaustion, grief, and the oppressive psychic atmosphere. He wiped his eyes with the back of a tattered sleeve and took in his surroundings. This was the heart of the transformation. The ground where the Gamma Gym once stood was now a circular plaza of smooth, obsidian-like stone that seemed to drink the light. Strange, sorrowful flora grew in elegant, mournful patterns, weeping willows with crystalline leaves that chimed softly in a non-existent breeze, and night-blooming flowers the color of dried blood that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic light. At the center of it all was the throne, a swirling, living vortex of scarlet energy, currently empty. Wanda was not here. The silence in this sanctum was different. It wasn't the vacant silence of the city. It was a heavy, expectant silence, like a church before a funeral. He was standing on consecrated, sorrowful ground. "She knows you're here," the second user's voice was a sharp edge in his mind. "The blast from your attack was a dinner bell. Stay sharp." Deku didn't need the warning. Danger sense, which had been a low hum during his encounter with All Might, was now a persistent, high-frequency vibration at the base of his skull. There was no immediate killing intent, but the potential for peril was overwhelming. He was a foreign body in the heart of an immune system, and it was about to react. He took a tentative step towards the empty throne, his boots making no sound on the strange, dark stone. He had to understand. He had to see, to feel, what had created all of this. What kind of grief could reshape the world? Then he heard it. Not a voice, but a sound. The hiss of ice. He spun around, green lightning flaring to life around him. From the edge of the clearing, 3 figures emerged from the crimson twilight of the garden, stepping onto the obsidian plaza. They moved with a placid, unnerving grace, their expression serene, their eyes glowing with that same faint, scarlet light. His heart plummeted. It was Katsuki Bakugo, Shoto Todoroki, and Tenya Ida, his A-team. The powerhouse trio of Class 1A. And they were standing between him and his goal. "Midoriya!" Ida's voice cut through the heavy silence. It was crisp and clear, but stripped of its usual passionate urgency. It was the voice of a machine executing its programming. "Your erratic behavior is causing a disharmony in this place of peace. It must be rectified. Just give it up, Deku," Bakugo said, his voice a low, calm murmur that was infinitely more terrifying than his usual explosive roar. He held his hands out to his sides, the gauntlets on his forearms gleaming. "Stop fighting. It's so much better when you just let go. No more anger. No more proving yourself. Just quiet." The words were a twisted reflection of Bakugo's entire existence. His ambition, his rage, his volcanic drive to be the #1 hero. It had all been hollowed out, leaving behind only the shell of his power, now wielded in service of this awful, placid tranquility. Todoroki said nothing. He simply raised his right hand, and the ground around them began to frost over. The ice spread in beautiful, intricate fractal patterns, not like a weapon, but like an artist painting a canvas. It was a cage of exquisite, deadly beauty. Deku's mind raced, his analytical brain kicking into overdrive, pushing past the fresh wave of despair. This was different from his encounter with All Might. His mentor had been a single, relentless force. This was a strategic unit. Power, speed, and utility, all working in perfect, hive-minded unison. He couldn't just run. They would corner him in seconds. "They are not themselves, Izuku," Nana's voice was a firm reminder. "But their powers are unchanged. Their instincts are still there, simply repurposed. Use that. You know them better than anyone. You've studied them for years." She was right. He had filled notebooks with analyses of their fighting styles, their strengths, their weaknesses. He knew every move, every feint, every tell. He had to use that knowledge, not to defeat them, but to outmaneuver them, to neutralize them without causing permanent harm. The confrontation began. There was no battle cry, no dramatic standoff. They simply began to advance, a 3-pronged tide of placid force. Ida was the spearhead. With a soft, almost inaudible whine from his engines, he shot forward, aiming to close the distance. His movements were perfect, a straight, unwavering line, the most efficient path to his target. There was none of his usual flair, none of the passionate declarations of his hero name. He was pure, calculated speed. At the same time, Bakugo raised his gauntlets, not for a huge explosion, but for a series of small, controlled blasts. AP shot. The beams of concentrated explosive energy lanced through the air, not aimed directly at Deku, but around him, hurting him, cutting off his escape routes, forcing him into Ida's path. It was a textbook pincer movement, executed with terrifying, silent precision, and all the while, Todoroki's ice was spreading, turning the obsidian plaza into a treacherous ice rink, limiting Deku's footing and creating walls to hem him in. Deku reacted. He activated full cowling at 40%, pushing his body to its current sustainable limit. He couldn't afford to be slow. He didn't meet Ida's charge head-on. Instead, he used FA Gene, releasing a burst of kinetic energy to leap straight up, high into the air, over Ida's head. He was airborne, a temporary reprieve. But Bakugo was ready. He angled his gauntlets upwards, tracking Deku's arc. A volley of AP shots followed him into the sky. "Black Whip!" Deku yelled, unleashing tendrils of dark energy. But there was nothing to grab onto in the open air. So he improvised. He fired 2 whips straight down, not at his friends, but at the ice-covered floor. They latched on, and he pulled, violently altering his trajectory mid-air. He swung sideways, the AP shots searing the air where he had been a second before. He landed on a patch of ground Todoroki hadn't yet frozen, skidding to a halt. He was already breathing heavily, his mind working furiously. They weren't fighting like individuals. They were a single entity with 3 bodies. Their synergy was perfect, flawless, something they had never quite achieved in training because their own ambitions and personalities had always gotten in the way. Wanda's control hadn't just pacified them, it had perfected them as a combat unit. It was this perfection that gave him an idea. Perfection had a weakness, it was predictable. "Ida, your form is perfect!" Deku yelled, his voice strained. "But it's too rigid! You always take the most direct path." He feinted to the left. As expected, Ida instantly adjusted his course, calculating the new, most efficient intercept vector. Bakugo, in perfect sync, shifted his aim to bracket Deku's new position, but it was a trap. At the last second, Deku fired a single strand of Black Whip, not at Ida, but at the ground directly behind him. He used it as a pivot point, swinging himself in a tight, brutal arc, back the way he came. He was now on a collision course with Bakugo. Bakugo's reaction was instantaneous. He lowered his gauntlets to fire a close-range, non-lethal stun grenade blast, designed to disorient and subdue. But Deku wasn't his target. "Kaken, you always lead with your right!" Deku shouted, a line from his old notebooks. As Bakugo prepared his blast, Todoroki, seeing his teammate about to be engaged, sent a wave of ice surging forward to entrap Deku. But Deku had anticipated this. He had orchestrated it. Just as Todoroki's ice wall began to form, and just as Bakugo was about to fire, Deku dropped. He slid across the slick ground, low and fast, right between them. The timing was perfect. Bakugo's stun grenade, aimed at where Deku had been, erupted directly in front of Todoroki's face. The brilliant, disorienting flash caused Todoroki's concentration to break for a split second. His serene smile faltered into a momentary, confused grimace. The consequence was immediate. The wave of ice he was creating, no longer under precise control, exploded outwards in a chaotic, uncontrolled spike, directly in Ida's path. Ida, moving at top speed and committed to his perfect, straight line, had no time to adjust. He ran headlong into the unexpected ice wall with a sickening crunch of metal and ice. He was thrown back, his engine sputtering, his armor dented. He slid across the plaza, dazed, momentarily out of the fight. 1 down. But the reprieve was short-lived. Bakugo had already recovered, his placid expression returning instantly. The failed stun grenade was irrelevant. He simply moved to the next tactical step. He began to fly, using his explosions not for overwhelming power, but for precise, controlled aerial maneuverability. He hovered above Deku, looking down like a calm, silent hawk. "Your chaos creates inefficiency," Bakugo stated, his voice a flat observation. "It will be corrected." From the ground, Todoroki had also recovered. His brief moment of confusion was gone. He now switched tactics. His left side began to steam, flames licking at his fingertips. He sent waves of fire across the plaza, not to burn Deku, but to melt the ice, creating treacherous patches of water and thick, billowing clouds of steam. He was reshaping the battlefield, trying to rob Deku of his mobility and visibility. Deku was trapped between an aerial threat and a shifting, treacherous ground, all while being choked by steam. Smokescreen, Un's voice was a simple, one-word suggestion in his mind. Deku smirked, a grim, tired expression. Way ahead of you. He unleashed his own quirk, Smokescreen, adding his thick, gray smoke to Todoroki's steam. The plaza was plunged into a swirling vortex of gray and white, a blinding fog. Visibility dropped to 0. For his opponents this was a problem. For Deku, it was an advantage. I can no longer see them, Izuku. Nana's voice was tense. I cannot guide you. You don't have to, Deku thought back. He closed his eyes, plunging himself into total sensory deprivation. He didn't need to see. He had danger sense. In the swirling fog, he was a ghost. He could feel them, not as people, but as points of intent. Bakugo was a steady, hovering pressure from above. Todoroki was a grounded, radiating point of heat to his left. He could feel the slight intensification as they moved, predicting their paths before they took them. He moved silently through the fog. He knew he couldn't take Bakugo out of the air easily. But Todoroki was on the ground. He circled around, using the steam and smoke as cover. He felt Todoroki's presence move, felt the shift in the air as he prepared to unleash another wave of fire to try and burn away the fog. Deku lunged. He burst out of the smoke, a green and black blur. Todoroki, whose placid senses were focused on the larger battlefield, was taken completely by surprise. Deku didn't attack. He slid in low, using Black Whip to wrap around Todoroki's ankles, pulling his feet out from under him. Todoroki fell, his serene expression unchanging even as he hit the ground with a hard thud. Before he could react, before he could unleash either fire or ice, Deku was on him. Not with a punch, but with a complex web of Black Whip, pinning his arms to his sides, binding his legs, cocooning him in tendrils of dark energy. He was neutralized. 2 down. Threat detected. Neutralizing. Bakugo's voice came from directly above. Deku looked up. Through a gap in the swirling smoke, he saw Bakugo descending, both gauntlets aimed straight at him. He was preparing a massive, concussive blast, designed to knock out both Deku and the still struggling Todoroki at his feet. A calculated, acceptable loss. There was no time to dodge. No time to run. So Deku did the one thing Bakugo would never expect. He didn't run away from the threat. He ran towards its source. He let go of Todoroki and launched himself straight up, directly at Bakugo. He used FA Gene for a burst of vertical speed, roaring up to meet the descending hawk. For the first time since the fight began, a genuine emotion flickered across Bakugo's face. Surprise. His combat instincts, buried deep beneath the scarlet haze, screamed at him. This was wrong. This was not how a cornered opponent should act. His placid mind, however, simply processed it as an anomaly. He adjusted his aim, ready to fire at point-blank range. But Deku was faster. He shot past Bakugo's outstretched gauntlets, getting inside his guard. He was now face to face, inches away from his childhood friend, his rival. He saw the red glow in Bakugo's eyes, the serene, empty smile on his lips. And it broke his heart. He grabbed the front of Bakugo's hero costume with one hand. With the other, he reached up and tore the grenade-like pin from his gauntlet. He didn't throw it. He didn't use it. He simply held it up between them. Remember this, Kaken? Deku asked, his voice raw and desperate. The first time we fought here. At the battle trial. You were going to use this on me. You were going to bring the whole building down just to win. He saw a flicker in Bakugo's eyes. A ghost of a memory. You were so angry. Deku continued, his voice dropping, becoming more personal. Angry at me, at All Might, at the whole world. You fought with everything you had. You screamed, you swore, you never, ever gave up. That ambition, that fire, that's who you are, Kaken. Not this quiet doll. He brought his forehead to rest against Bakugo's, a gesture of desperate, painful intimacy. Where did you go? He whispered. Come back. Bakugo's body went rigid. The serene smile on his face twitched, then vanished, replaced by a deep, furious scowl. The red glow in his eyes warred with his natural, fiery crimson. His hands, no longer placid, clenched into tight fists. "Deku!" he growled, his own voice, his real voice, rough and full of confused rage. What did you?" The control was shattering. Deku's direct, emotional appeal, a targeted strike against the very core of Bakugo's personality, was doing more damage than any punch ever could. But before Bakugo could fully break free, a wave of scarlet energy, more powerful and concentrated than anything Deku had felt before, washed over them. It emanated from the throne at the center of the plaza. The queen had noticed her knight was faltering, and she was reinforcing her control. The scowl on Bakugo's face slackened. The fire in his eyes was extinguished, replaced once more by the placid red glow. The real Kaken was gone, submerged again beneath the tide of peace, but the moment of connection had served its purpose. In his confusion, Bakugo's flight control had faltered. They were now falling from the sky, locked together. Deku twisted his body, ensuring he would hit the ground first. He wrapped his arms around the controlled Bakugo, shielding him, and braced for impact. They hit the obsidian floor with a bone-jarring crash. Deku took the full force of the landing, a cry of pain escaping his lips as his ribs screamed in protest. The air was knocked from his lungs, and his vision swam with black spots. He lay there, gasping for breath, the placid, smiling face of his friend just inches from his own. He had done it. He had neutralized all three of them. Ida was dazed and immobilized. Todoroki was bound. Bakugo was lying on top of him, conscious but momentarily stunned from the fall. He had won. But it felt like the most profound loss of his life. He gently pushed Bakugo off him and staggered to his feet, his body a symphony of pain. He looked down at his friends, his comrades. They were defeated, but their faces were still peaceful, their smiles still serene. They had tried to save him with all the power at their disposal, and in their placid minds he was the villain, the one disrupting the perfect, beautiful peace. He hadn't just fought their bodies. He had fought their twisted love. "I'm sorry," he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked at Ida, still struggling against the ice. At Todoroki, trussed up in black whip. At Bakugo, now slowly, gracefully getting to his feet, his smile returning. He had won the battle, but he knew the cost. He had pushed himself to his physical and emotional limit. He was wounded, exhausted, and now he had to face the source of it all. He turned his back on his defeated friends and took a painful, limping step towards the empty, swirling throne. The heavy, expectant silence of the plaza returned, pressing in on him. He had passed the final test. He had overcome the last of her guardians, and now, the queen was ready for her audience.